I'm so excited to welcome you to Season 3 of Career Resilience. My name is Jann. I'm a Senior Human Resources Consultant at Keast, a progressive accounting firm in London, Ontario, Canada. Each week, I get to talk with people about their career path and their career journey, and maybe we can all learn from each other how to be a little bit more resilient in the challenging world of work. Please check out my website, career-resilience.com, where you'll find Season 1 and Season 2, and now Season 3. Welcome.
Love what you do and do what you love.
The best career advice I've received, follow the fun.
Those opportunities will just organically present themselves.
Establish those connections and maintain those connections.
Acceptance just means accepting what is.
I don't think we should just put ourselves in a box.
At the end of the day, it was always me that I said, I'm not doing good enough right now.
I want it to always be, movie night on Friday night.
My guest today is Sam Blackham. Sam, welcome to Career Resilience.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. And we're going to talk about your career. And I just want to read off what I think you do. And maybe you can tell me if that is what you do. So you are a chartered surveyor. And we're going to get into what a chartered surveyor does. And you tend to do project management on building projects, is my understanding of your role. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into that because I want to understand it, especially as you're located and you work in London, England, correct?
Correct, yeah, that's correct.
And just for clarity, I work in London, Ontario, Canada, which is why I don't have an accent, but you do have an accent.
Yeah, depending on which side of the pond you're on.
So are you from London, Sam?
I'm not. I'm from Birmingham, which is about 2 hours north of London. But yeah, from the UK.
Okay. And Birmingham, that is famous for its canals.
For its what? It's
what do you think it's famous for?
Not many things, to be honest. Cadbury chocolate maybe is the one thing I know you're familiar with.
Yes, I am.
Cadbury chocolate, and then Jaguar Land Rover is the other thing that's from Birmingham and made there. But yeah, it's not quite as famous as London.
Yeah, but Birmingham, I have heard, has as many canals as Venice.
Yeah, they'll cling on to that. Yeah. So no, it does have a lot of canals. So it was a big industrial city in the sort of Industrial Revolution, and there's lots of factories, so they built lots of canals. But it is slap bang in the middle of the UK, so there's no coast. So they built lots of canals to get things in and out.
Oh, okay, that's why.
Yeah.
And to your point, you did mention Cadbury World, and I do love Cadbury World because they give you a fair amount of free chocolate when you wander around and see it. It's fantastic. Yeah, I highly recommend anybody to go to Cadbury World. So can you tell me, to start off, just so we get a sense of you, what is an interesting or random fact about you?
Whether it's interesting or not, but so I've lived in, I put this as my opener for my intro at work as an interesting fact, but I've lived in Thailand, France, Italy, and also Birmingham, which I think was probably the highlight for everyone. So that was my interesting fact, that I've lived in those 4 places. Did
you live in those places for a period of time?
Yeah, so a couple of months in each of the foreign countries, and then 18 years in Birmingham, so a bit longer in Birmingham.
Yeah. And of the places you've lived, exclusive of Birmingham, but inclusive of what has been your favorite place?
I think probably London does just get it. I do love London. I think London's one of the best cities in the world. I think it's an amazing place, and I think anyone that's lived there if you love it, you get drawn back to the buzz of it. But I do think I lived in the French Alps for a summer and worked out there, and that was amazing because I think it's just got so much going for it in terms of scenery and things you can do outdoors, and it's a beautiful place. So that's probably a close second. If you could combine the two, you'd have the perfect place.
So because we talk about careers on this podcast, tell me, you're a chartered surveyor. So what does that mean that you do for a living?
Yeah, no one knows, which is always it'd be fun to just be like a doctor or a lawyer where people just know what you do. But
yeah.
So basically it's a really broad career. So there's anything to do with property and land can be a chartered surveyor, but me particularly, I do property development essentially. So I'm a chartered project manager. So I basically make projects happen. So if you see big developments in big cities, there'll be a chartered project manager that oversees it. And that is from literally the point go to handing over the keys at the end. So you would get involved in appointing the teams, appointing architects, picking designs, managing the costs, making sure the numbers add up, making sure the developer's going to make profit, managing the building work on site, managing planning permission, all of those things you'll get involved in and oversee. So it's quite a varied role, and you have to be a bit of a jack of all trades, I guess.
Sounds like it. So Sam, do you not have to bring a lot of people together?
Yeah, so that's a big part of, I think, similar to your role and HR and those sort of roles, you have to be a bit of a people person, I guess. You have to be able to, what I really like about it is you have to take, because construction sites are always chaos, no matter how well they're run. You're dealing with all these different little firms and businesses and people, and you have to sort of take that chaos, manage it, and then present that to the client in a way that they'll understand and they'll appreciate, and they'll understand the risks, they'll understand risks to their budget, risks to their timeline, risks to their end user. And you have to be able to go onto a building site and have a heated conversation with a builder, and then also go into a boardroom and say, well, you're spending £100 million on this building and it may cost you an extra £50 million because of these reasons, you know?
Yes.
So you have to be able to step into both worlds that are very different. So I think that's really interesting.
What is the most stressful aspect of your role?
I think dealing with the construction industry. So there's big construction companies, which are called main contractors, which basically you're Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, you're a property developer, and you appoint them and they take on all the risk. And typically on these big contracts and get a percentage profit for that. But what a lot of people don't realize is they don't do any of the work themselves. They will just farm it out to a series of smaller companies. Oh. So you could have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, who are all companies that sit below them. And you get to the base of that, and it's quite often little family run businesses who will do bricklaying or steel or whatever it is. And I think there is a real challenge in managing those people because they often aren't as invested in the project. They get a flat fee for what they do, so you have to manage them and their sort of often challenging business. So for example, I've had projects in the last year where they've gone bankrupt because of the pandemic, and then that has a knock-on effect on the whole project. So yes. I think managing that supply chain is really difficult.
Yeah.
And it's something people aren't, unless you work in the industry, just aren't aware of.
Just to back up for a second, what attracted you to going in this career direction?
I think I ask myself that sometimes. So I did a sort of random degree at uni, and my intention was always to do law school after university. So I in halfway through my degree got a place, and that was kind of my plan. And then I ended up going to a careers day randomly at the university, and there was a lady there that worked for my company that I did my grad scheme with in the end. And I've always sort of been interested in property and buildings, and I think it's something that I've always watched grand designs and things like that.
Yes.
So got chatting with her, and she was really passionate about it, and it's a big, massive company, so it was quite appealing in that sense. And she offered me some work experience, so I did 2 weeks work experience in my second year of uni in their office in London, and really enjoyed it. So it was a company called Arcadis, which is like a big multinational engineering company. I think there's like 28,000 people in it. It's a really big listed company. And I really enjoyed it. They had a free bar in the office, which was part of the sales pitch, to be honest. So yeah, and I then applied for the grad scheme and did all the assessment days and all that sort of thing. And my third year, I think halfway through my third year, they offered me a grad scheme and like a sponsorship for my master's, so I could do a course in that area. So it was a bit too good to turn down, to be honest.
Yes.
I think having enjoyed it, and the thought of getting lots of debt for law school without a job guaranteed at the end of it was a bit off-putting, and so yeah, and haven't looked back really.
I don't know that we actually have grad schemes in Canada. Can you just give me a thumbnail sketch of what a grad scheme is?
So it's a scheme that bigger companies normally do for graduates. So it normally involves taking people that have no work experience from the university, and there's often some training involved. So they tend to be for law firms, chartered surveyors, accountants, actuaries, things like that, where you go in and perhaps have a period of time where you're under sort of some sort of training program, and then so but it's designed specifically for people coming out of university. So they a lot of the universities in the UK have sort of career days where you'll have the companies doing the sales pitch basically.
Yeah. Okay. So what we have here is co-op. So that would be called cooperative education here. So it sounds that's a similar thing. Can you tell me about a project that you worked on that you're specifically really proud of?
Yeah, I mean, there's been lots. I mean, I think my projects that I've done with Grosvenor have been really cool. So I've spent a year seconded into a client, which is the Duke of Westminster's property business, and they have a lot of sort of landmark properties in London. So I've done 3 or 4 projects with them now, which is really cool. And a lot of them are listed buildings, conservation areas, and they're all projects that sort of landmarks in that area. So one I'm just finishing at the moment is 3 buildings that built in the 1800s, and they were literally built out of almost rubble. So they're really complicated buildings. 2 were built together. One was originally built by a pharmacist, and they're all in sort of prime Mayfair locations, and they've had sort of grand facades put on them, and we did a whole cut and carve project where we basically just kept the facade. Everything inside was pulled down. We did a basement dig out, and then it's going to be a restaurant and a pub on the ground floor, and then there's like a co-work sort of WeWork type office above. And it's not the biggest project I've done by far, but it's probably been the most complicated because we procured the project. So we signed the contract with a contractor just before the pandemic. So we then had to navigate all the lockdowns. We had several site managers leave and quit, so they all work for the subcontractor. So we've had real high churn of staff. We've had a subcontractor go bust. We've had lots of delays associated with COVID. The contractor, because of the way the contracts are let, so they it's a fixed price contract. So
Ooh.
just before the pandemic, they said we will do it for X number of million, and they've had to stick to that. And obviously, we've had crazy inflation in everything, but particularly in the construction market. So the contractor is losing a lot of money, and we've had to navigate that with them. So it's been a really, really challenging project. But we're coming at the end of it, and we will be completing middle of November. So it's kind of been a big milestone for the people involved. But yeah, I think that would be a really cool project to get over the line. And it's just opposite Selfridges, so it's in that you'll have probably been there, Jann.
Yes.
You'll have probably walked past it.
Yeah. How do people react when you say you work for the Duke of Westminster?
I think people either don't know who he is, or I think because of there's quite a lot of press when he got the title, because he was really young. His dad died quite young, and he, overnight became one of the wealthiest people in the world. So I think there's a lot of people that understandably think that that's wrong, and there should be that perhaps would rather that land was split up and it wasn't all in his hands. But I think, on the other hand, anyone that's come across Grosvenor and knows that they have a lot of charities, they do a lot of good in the community, and anyone that understands or perhaps works in the property industry, if you're an architect or someone like that, knows that they have a big role in conservation as well in that area. So, you walk around West London, and a lot of that area has been maintained that way because of the Grosvenor estate and their trust. So a bit of a mixed bag, I guess, which is probably true of most people in the public eye, I suppose.
Yes, I would say. One of the things that you mentioned is that you can't dig a hole in London without coming across a German bomb or a Roman.
Yeah.
Really, when you think of it, when you think of London, it's trying to maintain the London that people imagine and the historic and so on. I mean, that is a very big responsibility to carry.
We have a listing process, with like a planning process in the UK, which has different ratings depending on how special a building is, basically. But a lot of the Grosvenor buildings are grade 2 star listed, which is like, about as you're almost dealing with a national monument rather than a building.
And that's what makes London London, right? What is the definition of a sustainable skyline? What does that mean?
There's a massive push in property and construction to become more sustainable, because it's a ridiculous amount of carbon that's generated by building, using, and then demolishing buildings. And to be honest, there's a lot of greenwashing going on. I don't know if that's a term used in Canada, but there's a lot of businesses and developers claiming to be very sustainable and green, when in reality that's probably not the case. Lots of plants being put on the outside of buildings, but they're made from concrete and steel. So it's but I think it's a massive area. And actually, so the RICS, who are the body that regulate chartered surveyors, and to become a chartered surveyor you have to pass their exams. They have a big push to make chartered surveyors be like at the forefront of that, and you can do all these different courses to become a specialist in it. And there's all these different accreditations for things like BREEAM and Passive House, which are basically trying to make the sort of Tesla of buildings, if you can imagine that sort of, the future of what that looks like, and making it more sustainable.
So Sam, do you in your world think much about global warming? Does that cross your mind when you're working on projects? Is that an aspect of it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of developers and clients now, that's a big focus. And I think for Grosvenor, because to be blunt about it, they have the resources to be thinking about it. They're a bit less commercial than a normal house builder, and they've got some great assets, which mean that they take a really and because of the history of it, they take a really long-term view. So they will buy sites thinking we can develop it in 100 years, whereas very few businesses can take that sort of approach. So they have a big push for sustainability, making their buildings carbon neutral, energy efficient, really well insulated. There's a big push for that. And then there's also the factor of consumer demand. So in London, a lot of buildings still don't have air conditioning, which is probably mental for people in North America to think about. But we just not built for any sort of heat over here, and it's becoming a lot more common. So retrofitting all of those systems into old buildings is a big thing for Grosvenor. So the building I'm just completing now, is got state of the art air conditioning in it, because it's going to need it as an office space. So a building that was built in the 1800s has to have all of these things built in, and it takes a lot of clever design from engineers and the architects to squeeze it all in, basically.
Yes, I've heard that where you live, the goal was to keep heat in, where that's just not the way we work over here. And I'm sure that during the heat wave, because London and England and Europe is famous for this heat wave we had this past summer, that people rethink these things, that we don't want to keep heat in, we want it out.
Yeah.
Well, such a difference over the years.
Yeah. And even now you think 50 years ago people would have been sat at their desk with some paper, and now a lot of the offices in London are for traders, people in finance, so they'll have 3 or 4 screens each, which will generate heat. And so all of that is a big change as well.
So are you impacted by things like the move to people working from home offices? Is that something that enters your mind? Do you have to pay attention to all that stuff?
Yeah, definitely. It's a big thing in the industry, and I think it's a big thing for London as well, because people invest insane amounts of money in property in central London, because businesses will pay insane amounts of money to rent there, and so it all filters through, and there was a big concern, I think, particularly during the pandemic, that investors would pull out of schemes in central London, because it's particularly in the city and Canary Wharf, it's all driven by desk numbers and people, that culture of getting your train into work and sitting at your desk and getting your train home. So I think that was a big thing for everyone. And I think coming out the back of the pandemic, I think people in London particularly, I think we all live in small flats because it's so expensive. And I think because people probably live in London because they want to go to a bar after work and the theatre and that sort of thing, I think there's been a big shift back to people going in the office at least 2 or 3 days a week. So I think that has been it's been a change, but it's not undermined the value of those buildings. So I think what the market seems to be doing is moving towards smaller offices where people come in, and perhaps this really quite boring study is that on how many desks different businesses need per head, and that's a big thing for driving these buildings. So a project I finished last year, which just more out of luck than judgment, sort of finished just as we were coming out of the pandemic, has done really, really well, because it has 10 small little offices in it. So all of these businesses that just want a touchdown point in central London, for people coming in from Surrey or wherever for a day, 2 days a week, have a really amazing small office, and they don't need as many desks. So it's an interesting point, because I think there's a lot of research now and a lot of the industry is saying that everyone's office needs to be nicer than their living room. So how do we get people in?
Yes.
So yeah, it definitely does have an impact.
Yeah, it's interesting because before the pandemic, I remember, we would have various discussions about people working from home and all the working remotely and all the reasons why that would not work. I mean, that's basically what that discussion was. It was rarely about all the reasons it would work. And then
or how to make it work.
or how to make it work. And then the pandemic came along and we had to make it work and the world changed. So it's really interesting that catastrophic things drive change much more quickly.
Absolutely.
People in London are digging down under their homes. Is that right? To create, because there don't appear to be a lot of basements in the architecture there.
Yeah, I think so particularly in West London where the property prices are insane and you have a lot of people that a lot of like trophy assets, to be honest. You have people from, not so much anymore, but you had a lot of Russian, you had a lot of Middle Eastern money, Chinese as well. So people buy listed house, or historic houses that are sort of your classic townhouse that you'd probably see in Notting Hill or something like that. And then because these people are used to having their house in California and they also want a pool and parking and a gym and there's nowhere to put it. So they will basically just prop the whole house up on temporary supports and then slowly dig underneath it to build a basement for these things. So it's been a bit controversial because there was a point where people were building basements bigger than the house above. So there's been a bit of a shift in the planning regulations around that in Westminster, which is the main sort of West London borough, but people are still building pretty big basements for
massive
to have all their toys in,
like with basketball courts and swimming pools. It's just kind of hard. It's hard to imagine what that must look like to go down into the ground and have more house down there than you have above. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So let's go back to career resilience. So tell me, what is the best career advice that you have received?
Oh, good question. I think not having it all figured out in your first few years. I think some of the best, happiest people I know have changed roles and careers several times because they, I think it's very difficult for anyone at 18, 20, 21 to know this is what I want to do for the next 40 years. No one knows that. So I think just being flexible and not beating yourself up if something doesn't work. If it doesn't work for you, then, look at other options and don't be afraid to sort of take a bit of a jump and leap of faith, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. And the second thing I wanted to ask you is there a book that you've read that inspired you or interested you, or a podcast you've listened to, or even something you've streamed on Netflix or something that sort of you thought, well, that's kind of interesting?
So my guilty pleasure is anything it's kind of related to what I do, but is anything home related. So grand designs. We used to have a series in the UK called Property Ladder, which is a bit of a it's probably about 15 years old, but I used to love this show because it was all about people flipping houses, and you'd have people that have never done it before and who are ambitious and doing things completely financed on credit cards and doing stuff themselves and doing it around their jobs. But I think it's always quite an inspiring show because I think people are just sort of pushing themselves because they want a bit more and they want to make some money out of flipping houses. So I always really enjoyed that show. And I think Grand Designs is the other one because I don't know if you get that in Canada, but it's it's pretty cool because it's basically just about people building their own houses, but they're always a bit like architecturally special. So they'll be really well designed and a bit different to what anyone's done before. So
It sounds a bit to me like a busman's holiday.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I suppose it is. It's not the only thing I stream, but
but there is something fascinating about watching those shows, and we have a ton of them here as well. And there's something about taking from nothing to something amazing, and especially where you can see the possibilities of it. I watched one where somebody built a home out of basically a rock cave, and I thought, isn't that just amazing? Like human ingenuity, or this big move that people are taking shipping containers and making them into very interesting looking living space.
yeah.
So
My friend's brothers turned one into a restaurant on a beach, which was quite cool.
oh wow,
Yeah.
that would be cool.
Yeah.
And finally, what are you most absolutely proud of about the career that you've built to date?
I think I was quite ambitious when I was like 21, and I kind of just moved to London, started a random job that I had no experience in, worked 5 days a week, and then I did my master's while I was working, like in the evenings and at weekends, and I think looking back, I was quite young to be doing all of that, and I think it was quite a lot of work at that age. So I think I'm proud that I just stuck it out and got through it, and I think I think it's quite tough in your first few years because for most people they're paid rubbish money. You're probably living in a house share that's a bit grim, and I think for me doing that and sort of studying as well was at times quite tough. So I think having got through that, I'm proud of, and it's kind of opened doors for me and to get promoted, and so I'm glad I did it when I did it, but I wouldn't do it again, put it that way.
That is amazing discipline, especially at those ages where there's so much to distract you.
Exactly, yeah.
And so to be able to focus like that, that's something to be amazingly proud of. And you know what? It has certainly panned out in the career that you've built. I mean, you've done extremely well for at a very young age. So you deserve to be very proud of yourself, Sam, for sure. So those are everything I wanted to ask you. Is there anything you wanted to add?
I don't think so. No, I think
we're good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jann.
To our viewers and listeners, thanks for listening to our eclectic conversation with Sam today from across the pond. And it really is interesting to talk with people from around the world and see how we're different and how we're the same. So thanks for joining us. Listen wherever you get your podcasts, watch us on YouTube. And until we meet again, thanks so much.